Hey everybody, I'm Zoe.
And I'm Chandi.
And this is Bound by the Cloak. It's Halloween. The cool, crisp air blows as you walk down streets filled with ghosts and ghouls, as well as the occasional pirate, princess, or cowboy. So yeah, I mean, it's Halloween, and our guest tonight is Mike Brown of the Pleasing Terrors podcast, as well as Charleston's Pleasing Terrors Nighttime Walking Ghost Tour. So thank you, Mike, for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Mike. I think it might be one of the few guests who we met in person before we actually spoke to. So it's kind of cool because we got to see you first, and now we're doing this.
It was great having you guys on the tour.
Yeah, all two of us.
All two of us.
It was kind of fun though, because it was kind of just, I feel like, like the conversation was good. We can kind of just talk about things and ask questions and Yeah, so we were both in Charleston in August. And we were there because we had done a episode months before about Gullah Geechee culture and the Sea Islands. So we saw Charleston, we saw the Sea Islands, and everywhere that I go, and whoever is with me, I drag them to a ghost tour. Because that's just...
Like me.
Mm-hmm. She was the unfortunate soul that had to go. But, we both had a lot of fun. It was a really great tour. You do a really great job.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, it was a pleasure having you on the tour. I always, it's always a treat for me, especially to have fellow podcasters come on the tour. That doesn't happen very often, but I really enjoy it when it does. And as you were saying, I really, I don't recall specifically how big the group was on that particular tour, but I do enjoy, obviously from a business standpoint, it's good to have big groups, but the tours that I enjoy most tend to be the small ones, because you really have time to just talk to people. And it's not just, it's more of a two-way conversation instead of just a one-way presentation.
Of course, yeah. Yeah, it was raining that night, so I think whoever else was supposed to come canceled or just didn't show up or something like that.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. That was a really weird weekend, too, because it rained like most of the time, and I was able to see Charleston flood, which you hear about, and to experience it was something else.
And it was our first time there, so it was like, wow, this is a lot. Yeah.
Beautiful city, though.
Unfortunately, Charleston floods so often that it's kind of lost its novelty.
Yeah. So, how did you kind of get into, the paranormal and haunted history and spooky stuff? Was it something that happened, like an experience when you were younger, or you just always liked it?
No, I started off really interested in history, and I was just a big history buff. And I think I mentioned the first story that we talk about on the tour was about the Old City Jail. And there was a time, maybe 25, 30 years ago where I was at the time, I tend to go through like phases where I get really into different historical periods and just do these like deep dives. And at the time I was really interested in the Civil War. And so that was when I was reading about these U.S. soldiers, these officers that were prisoners of war inside the Old City Jail here in Charleston. And as I mentioned on the tour, there was one account from one of them where he saw this, ghostly woman in a white dress walking through the jail at night in the midst of an escaped attempt. And that was a point where I was like, oh, this is really interesting. This is a whole different type of history that I've never really looked at before. And from there, I just kind of started seeking it out in other places as well.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people who kind of go into this industry have had some sort of experiences. So did you have any paranormal experiences when you were growing up or even in your adult life?
Well, not when I was growing up. I have since I started doing this. And certainly since I started the podcast, because in the course of preparing episodes for the podcast, I've put myself in places where things were more likely to happen. One of which is the old jail here in Charleston. There have been some other places, sometimes, but usually on purpose, sometimes by accident, where I would say that I've felt something like a presence or had some sort of reaction to it. But that is growing up. I don't recall anything like that. That's been more of an adult experience for me.
For me, growing up, I had some experiences, but I was always just kind of interested in it, and I love history. So I think a lot of people that are into paranormal, spooky stuff also just really like history because it goes hand in hand.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, sort of the foundation of the ghost stories is the folklore, and the folklore and the history are inextricably tied to each other.
Yeah.
And so the folklore can't exist without, a portion of history in the mix. So, I think people who are big history buffs don't have a lot of trouble gravitating into the folklore and the ghost stories, which is, again, what happened to me.
Yeah.
But I think it's just what I love most is I think history in and of itself I find really interesting. But when you add that extra layer of legends and folk beliefs, it just makes it even more interesting.
Yeah, and those are usually like my favorite podcasts and things too. And just anywhere I go, I just love learning about it. So you're from South Carolina originally?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So
from Charleston.
And Charleston has such a rich history, such a long history, and such a haunted and dark history. What was it like kind of growing up in Charleston, just knowing that you're in a place with so much, just, I guess, like so many stories behind it?
Well, the thing about it is, and I think this is true to some extent anywhere, is that growing up here and being surrounded by it all the time, I sort of took it for granted. Right out of high school, I joined the Navy and I went off to California. And so it was only then that I sort of noticed it by its absence and began sort of craving something that I was used to having all around me, but hadn't really paid much attention to in the past. And so I really began diving deep into Charleston history and history in general when I came back to Charleston back in the early 90s.
And it was it was our first time, right, Zoe, when we went?
Yeah.
And a big reason was the history, and has a dark history, right?
Very much so.
It kind of also has like this, like, I feel like there's like a vibe when you go to places that have that much history, whether it's a city or even just like a Navy submarine, or, there's different locations where you can feel like a heaviness and you can feel like an eeriness. Not that it's necessarily always haunted, but just like this Like, you know, a lot has happened here. And I guess, like you said, you know, when you came back to Charleston, you really started digging into the history. And it didn't have an effect on you before all that much. But, like, has it kind of, I guess, changed the way that you, like, view the city? You feel this, you know, you feel about the city.
Oh, absolutely.
Now. Yeah.
Yes. It's a very, you know, it's one of those things. It's kind of like as a child, you know, you any relationship you have as a child tends to be fairly simple and straightforward. As an adult, relationships get a lot more complicated. And I think that's true. That's how I would characterize my relationship with Charleston. The more you know about someone, you know, the good, the bad, and the ugly, the more nuanced and complex your thoughts about that person are. And I think that's true with cities as well. You know, Charleston has a lot of bright and shiny history, a lot of beautiful architecture, a lot of culture, a lot of just sort of you know, nice red, white, and blue history, but at the same time, there is a lot of really dark stuff. And it's a lot of stuff that, honestly, the city has only sort of started to address and come to terms with, I would say, in the last decade. So even as a tour guide, for much of my time as a tour guide, there are things that you didn't see talked about very often.
I've heard people mention that before. Like, I've heard people say that they've taken tours, not necessarily haunted tours, but just, you know, just historical tours through the city. And a lot of things weren't mentioned. Obviously, notably, you know, slavery and certain things, like certain specific events not mentioned as well. And just kind of glossed over, you know, because you have the French Quarter, you know, you have these mansions and, you know, these like stately homes and things like that are discussed. But yeah, it's like people don't like to talk about the dark history of things, but like history to me is history. So I like learning about all of it.
Should be real.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And interestingly, from a tourism standpoint, the irony of that position is that people were interested in it. People coming to Charleston were interested in it, and they wanted to hear about the dark things. So it's not like it's something that people aren't wanting to hear about, but it was something that people didn't want to talk about. But that has changed somewhat in recent years. But there was, you know, there are some things, you know, there was one getting sort of talking about ghost stories. I did a series of episodes on the podcast. It was called The Mermaid Returns. And it was something that I'd found a few years ago, where I'd found a ghost story in Charleston that was intentionally buried. It was hidden on purpose because people in Charleston at the time didn't want to deal with what that story meant, and so they hid it within another ghost story. And a few years ago, I found it and had to kind of, you know, I found it and I wasn't sure what I was looking at. And I took it to people who were sort of professionals, you know, authors and biographers and college professors, and asked them, and they were like, "Oh, there's nothing to that." But it turns out there was. And but it was there was interestingly enough, you know, for the industry that I'm in of telling ghost stories, the real origin of that, of all of this Charleston folklore, if you go back, there was a guy by the name of John Bennett who was originally from Ohio, Chillicothe, Ohio, and he came to Charleston and he married a local sort of Charleston socialite, and he married into one of the, you know, wealthy sort of old Charleston families. And John Bennett, who's kind of forgotten about, I think, to a large extent nowadays, he was to some extent sort of like the J.K. Rowling of his day. He wrote a book. I'm blanking on the name of it. Hold on, let me see. I can step over to my bookshelf here because I've got a copy of it. A Master Skylark, and it's still in print. It's this very popular book, and so he was this very successful author, and he moved to Charleston, and he became fascinated with African American folklore. And in particular, ghost stories and creepy stories and legends and sort of the African American version of fairy tales that existed in Charleston at the time. And he started cataloging these things because they were disappearing. And he put together a series of stories that were sort of creepy, almost ghost stories. But when he gave a presentation of those to a group of Charleston ladies, I think in 1908, their reaction was they were so horrified by him publicly talking about these African American stories that he was ostracized. He was essentially cut off completely in Charleston society, and was, for all intents and purposes, socially dead after that. So much so that he had to leave. He fell into depression and drug use. I mean, it was his whole life basically collapsed. And the only thing that saved him was World War I and the fact that he had a rapport with the black community at the time, and they desperately needed someone like him to come back and sort of help bring that community into supporting the war and buying war bonds and whatnot, and all these and a number of other issues. But he learned his lesson, and so when he later wrote a book about those stories, one story in particular, he completely changed it to hide the facts. And that story, the story that he told is sort of like a Charleston version of Frankenstein. It's about this doctor that was robbing graves at night and stealing bodies because he'd fallen in love with a ghost, and he was trying to create a body that this ghost could inhabit so that they could be together. And in the writing of that story, he would have these different asides in the story. We'd say, by the way, you may have heard about this, or you might have heard people say that, this fact or that fact, and those aren't true. And this is the story that's true is the story that I'm telling you. And so what I did was I kind of just made a list of all the things that he said that weren't true. And I noticed that they sort of formed a whole story by themselves. And I started researching that story, and it turns out that the story traced back to an actual doctor that lived in Charleston in the mid 1800s, and that this doctor was he had an enslaved woman that he bought that lived in his house with him, and that she became pregnant. And in the midst of having a baby, there was a medical issue, and she died. And he tried to bury her body inside the house, in the basement of the house, and there was this huge uproar over it. And so, but it became the basis. This weird little story became the basis for these sort of legends. And but the ladies of Charleston at the time wanted to hide that story because there was this sort of insinuation of sexual relations between a slave owner and an enslaved woman, and that sort of thing was very prevalent. But it was this thing that was absolutely never to be discussed. Yeah. Even in the 20th century, even decades after slavery was over with, well into the Jim Crow era, it was never to be mentioned, and he didn't know that. He just thought, it's just
he wasn't
these are just old, these are old stories. What are you uptight about? But anyway, long story short, it's I get fascinated by finding things like that. It's one of the things that I really like about ghost stories. And, sometimes people sort of laugh at ghost stories, especially history people. But one of the things that I like is that sometimes ghost stories and folklore become repositories for things that history doesn't want to deal with. Yeah. And it becomes this nice place where something can be saved and just wait until, maybe somewhere down the road, it can be brought back out again and people will be willing to address it. Another a little bit off topic, but another aspect of all of that I was completely fascinated with, and I stumbled upon it by accident, and I have never ever heard it talked about anywhere, except for this one place. There is a book. It's again, I have it on my shelf. there's a book that I have. It's called Night Riders and Black Folk History, and here it is, and it was written by a lady by the name of Gladys Marie Fry. And one of the things that she talks about in this book is, I don't remember. I want to say it was maybe the 1930s or it could have been later. It's been a while since I've read it, but she was part of a group that was, during the efforts to address the Great Depression, the works projects, all that stuff. One of the things that they organized were these groups of people, sociologists and historians, to go to the African American community and try to chronicle some of their experiences during slavery. But these people were all white. And so there was this filter that all of that information was passing through these white academics before it landed on a page or in a place where, you would later see it. And so she was part of a group of African-American sociologists and historians that were attempting to do this themselves and not have that filter be there. And so they organized a group in Washington, D.C. that they went to talk to. And what she was there to talk about what they remembered of their parents and their grandparents from slavery. But what they wanted to talk about were ghost stories. And specifically how ghost stories had been used against their parents and their grandparents, and how during the days of slavery, their parents and grandparents would talk about how the slave owners would engineer ghost stories to try to control the people that were enslaved especially on plantations. If there was a patch of woods, or if there was a swamp, or if there was an old abandoned house, a mile down the road, they would tell the enslaved people, oh, that place is haunted, and they would create these stories. And then those stories might not be believed by the people that they were telling them to at first, the adults, but the kids that were there would hear them, and they would believe it because they're kids. And then they would pass it on to their kids. And over time, you had these haunted legends that were created, and people believed them to be real. And their entire purpose was to act as sort of an invisible fence, that if somebody ran away, they would not take shelter in those woods because, there was a witch that lived there. Or you wouldn't go to that swamp because that was where the boo hag lived, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I found that fascinating. And they would go so far in some of the instances as to dress up as ghosts and go wandering through the slave cabins on the plantation.
Wow. Oh,
and supposedly that's where groups like the Klan got the idea for using these white robes as to make themselves look like the ghost of dead Confederate soldiers. That was where the symbolism came from. But I find all that kind of stuff fascinating.
Yeah.
But like I said, I haven't heard it talked about anywhere.
Yeah, it's like a form of control too, right? Like if they're using ghosts against. Wow.
Which is a little uncomfortable for me, being that I'm in the ghost story business. But but it is a skeleton in the closet that I never expected to find. But it's there. So
wow.
But yeah, that's one of the interesting things I've stumbled across in the past.
Well, I mean, and today is Halloween, so what's that like in Charleston? How does the South or how do Southerners, celebrate Halloween? Is it big?
Yeah, I think it's nowadays Halloween has become to some extent fairly homogenized, I think, in the United States. I don't know that it's very different here from anywhere else. Yeah. When I leave here tonight and I go walking down to the park for my ghost tour, there's going to be a lot of people going on ghost tours, and there's going to be a lot of people dressed up and going to bars in their costumes. We may see some kids. We may see some packs of kids walking by, but yeah, I mean, it's. I will say this though, it almost seems like people, embrace Halloween more in terms of like decorating and whatnot, more than Halloween, more than Christmas.
Oh wow.
You see a lot more decorations, I think, at Halloween than you do at Christmas. I could be wrong, but that's just my impression.
Okay. Do you guys get like a lot of trick or treaters in your area, or is it just kind of?
Well, I don't live in like the historic part of Charleston. I live in the suburban part of Charleston,
Yeah.
and out there it's just like the suburbs anywhere.
Okay.
We get some kids coming around.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I never get to be there for it because I'm always giving tours. But
Right. So you never get stuck with candy duty. Got it.
No, I wouldn't mind doing it once for a change.
So let's talk about your podcast a bit. Pleasing Terrors. What made you start the podcast?
Well, years ago, I used to listen to a radio show. I guess it would be considered a podcast. It was called Darkness Radio. It was out of Minneapolis, and I would listen to it as I drove down because they would do this segment called Supernatural News, and they would just talk about weird little supernatural related stories in different places. And I liked it because, if they had a story about something that happened in Indianapolis, then if I had somebody on Indianapolis on my tour, I could say, "Oh, I just heard about this thing there." And it was a nice way to connect with people in the tour group. And that got me kind of interested in just learning more about haunted stuff outside of Charleston. And then I began to think, well, there's got to be, is there a way that I could tell these stories? And a friend of mine at the time was starting a history podcast, and it never occurred to me to do that. But then once the idea took hold, I was like, yeah, I could tell stories in a podcast form, and that was when I started that. And it's nice because I can talk about anything I want. And on the tour, I might have 10 or 15 minutes usually at most to talk about something, whereas in the podcast I can talk about something for an hour if I want to, as long as it's interesting. And also you can get a lot more nuanced on a podcast than you can on a tour. Tours kind of have to be very brief and to the point. The podcast, you can really take a deep dive into something, and I really enjoy that.
And speaking of tours, what are some of the places that you talk about, and do you get to go to many of the places that you talk about in your podcast?
I do as much as I can. I love traveling to places, and I love going on ghost tours when I travel to places. There are times when it's because I'm a one-person tour company, so it is hard for me to get away. And plus, my wife has zero interest in sleeping in haunted hotels and things like that, so that also limits my options when I travel. But if I can, I do, and sometimes I get lucky. I did an episode years ago about a place in Georgia, North Georgia, called Corpsewood Manor, and I just happened to have a guy come on the tour who lived in the town where this story took place. And so he invited me to come visit, and I did. And the short version, I don't know if you've ever heard about that story before, but I want to say it was in it's been years since I did. I want to say it might have been in the 80s, but there was a guy who was a professor at a college in Chicago, and who may or may not have been doing mind control experiments with the CIA. And he has a wife and kids, and then one day he tells his family that he comes out as being gay, and he's leaving, and wasn't like a romantic partner of his. It was more just like his servant somehow. This guy was like his butler almost, and they moved to rural North Georgia, and they buy a piece of land on top of a mountain way out in the woods. And they hand build a castle on top of this mountain. They make the bricks themselves. And so needless to say, in rural North Georgia in, late 70s, early 80s, they stand out already. And they stand out even more because they were openly Satanist. and they drove around in a black Jeep with a pentagram on the side of it. And when I went to this town, in this was probably 2018, maybe, people still called them the devil worshippers, but they were brutally murdered inside their castle, by these two guys that thought they were basically two guys that wanted money for drugs and thought, oh, these guys have probably got to have money in that castle. So they murdered them. And it was this awful, horrible scene. And then after that, and the two guys went to jail for it. But after that, somebody who they never identified burned the castle down. But the ruins of it are sitting there out in the woods. And there's all these ghost stories about those woods, as you can probably imagine. And so it was a place that I just felt I had to go see for myself. And fortunately, I had someone to guide me out there. And we had to go up to the top of this mountain. It was very sketchy. And the guy told me, he's like, I'll take you out there in the afternoon, but he's like, whatever you do, don't go back up there by yourself tonight. So, of course, that night I went back up there by myself, and it was very scary. But yeah, I don't get the chance to do stuff like that very often. But that you can hear a better told version of that on the podcast. The episode is called Corpsewood. But yeah,
I feel like they need to make a movie about that.
I'm surprised they haven't already.
Yeah.
I mean, people have written books about it. It's you can probably find tons of YouTube videos about it. I'm pretty sure every paranormal, supernatural podcast of any size has probably done an episode on it. But it was interesting to just go there and physically be in the place. It definitely was a creepy thing to be out in those woods. But yeah, that, and then sometimes I stumble across something completely by accident. And, a few years ago, my wife and I went to a concert in Duluth, Georgia. It was for the Killers. And we stayed in this random motel. And the day after the concert, we were getting in our car and getting ready to go back to Charleston. And I realized that, there's this big mall right behind the motel. And so we're like, we'll go walk around the mall for a little bit and just stretch our legs. And it turns out it was a place called Gwinnett Place Mall, and it was a dead mall. So the mall was open. You could go inside of it, but all of the stores were closed. And so it's like 11 o'clock in the morning, and we're just walking through this empty mall. And we both started to get this feeling, and it was this just growing sense of something was wrong in this mall. Even though we looked around at 11 o'clock in the morning and there's no one else there with us, but we could just feel it, and it just got worse, almost something like a panic attack. And then we were just like, we got to leave. We got to get out of here right now. And so we left, and we got in the car, and we drove home. And later that afternoon, I was curious about it. And so I Googled it, and it turned out a month before we were there, they had found the body of a college student who had been murdered, and her boyfriend had killed her and hidden her body in the back room of what had been a Subway restaurant in the food court of the mall. And she was there for months before anyone found her. And we didn't know any of that when we were there. It was just, we just had this reaction to this place, completely cold. And that mall, interestingly enough, and that food court were later used in the last season of Stranger Things. So that was one that was really creepy because it wasn't something I was looking for.
And I guess that would be one of your favorite places. Any other favorite places, or any place that you really wanted to go but just haven't had the chance to?
Oh, there's a long list of places I want to go.
Well, how about for 2026? What's on your bucket list?
On my bucket list for 2026 is there was a place right before COVID hit that I was planning to go to, and we had to cancel it. And I've just never gotten back around to it. It's a place in Michigan called Mackinac Island.
Oh yeah, I'm from Michigan, so
visit.
yeah, it's a popular destination. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Supposedly, there's a lot of ghost stories there, and I was always fascinated with it because when I was a kid, I saw this movie called Somewhere in Time, starring Christopher Reeve, and it was filmed there at the Grand Hotel, and so I've always wanted to go there. I don't know any of the ghost stories, but those would be something I'd be interested in researching. But other than that, I've always wanted to go like to the Winchester Mansion in San Jose, California. There's a place that it's not really a big fancy place to visit or anything, but in New York there is a place that I would love to go see for myself. It's my favorite New York City haunted location. It is 129 Spring Street, which is a clothing store. It's a clothing store called COS. It's in Soho. It's a clothing store called COS, COS. And the clothing store, if you go into this clothing store, you go downstairs to the men's department, and you walk back to where the cash registers are. There's this there's like a brick cylinder. It's like an old looking brick cylinder. And it's a well from the 1700s. And in 1799, the body of a woman named Elma Sands was found inside that well. And it turns out she lived in a boarding house with a number of people, including a guy by the name of Levi Weeks. And the story at the time was that these two were a couple secretly, and they were going to meet at the well one night and run away together because she may or may not have been pregnant. And he didn't go anywhere, and she disappeared. And 2 weeks later, her body was found at the bottom of the well. She had been strangled. And so Levi Weeks, being presumed to be her boyfriend, was put on trial for her murder. And it became the first big sensational murder trial in New York City history.
Wow.
And Levi Weeks' family had a lot of influence and money. And so they hired what at the time would be considered a legal dream team to defend him. His defense attorneys were Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr, working together. And needless to say, they won. And won decisively. The jury took, I think, about 5 minutes to come back with a not guilty verdict. And the legend goes that as Burr and Hamilton were leaving the courthouse, that one of Elma Sands' relatives was waiting on the steps of the courthouse, and that she put a curse on them, saying that they would never know peace until justice was served. And of course, shortly after that, Burr killed Hamilton in the famous duel. But that's the story. The story has a lot of twists and turns to it, because it turns out some of the things that had come out in the trial was that there was another guy that lived at the boarding house that was later convicted of strangling another woman, so he's a very likely suspect. It also turns out that Elma Sands was having an affair with the owner of the boarding house, who was married, so he's another suspect. So it turns into kind of a historical whodunit. Wow. And on top of that, the site itself had a pretty significant history for being haunted. Back in the 1970s, there was an Italian artist, I forget her name, but she lived across the street, and she was having these visions of a drowned woman, a woman in that, her clothes were soaking wet, standing in front of that building, and she even would paint paintings of her. But at the time, she didn't know the story. And then the location was later, it became a restaurant called Manhattan Bistro. And the restaurant had all kinds of paranormal activity going on. And especially after they decided to expand their basement, their wine cellar in the basement, and that they uncovered the well, where her body had been found. And so it's just there today. I'm just fascinated by the idea that you have people, shopping. They're just standing there shopping, standing right next to this really macabre piece of history, and they have no idea what it is they're standing next to. That just fascinates me to think about.
That's absolutely wild. I had no idea that was a thing, and guess what I might do next week?
Zoe, tour.
I mean, it's honestly,
and there are much that it's called the Manhattan Well murder. There are much better versions of that story that you can find than what I just gave you. But but it is one of my favorite stories.
Wow. Yeah, out of all the things that we've heard about New York,
I always feel weird saying things are my favorite stories when they center on like all of this awfulness and tragedy. But they're just, I find them interesting. They're really compelling stories, I guess I should say.
Yeah. Have you ever done any like paranormal investigations, or are you just a like spooky story guy?
I'm not with like not with any equipment or anything like that.
Okay.
I've The closest I've ever come to something like that was when I spent the night in the Charleston jail. And I went in there. I did that just, because at that point, this was back in January of 2017. And for years at that point, many years at that point, I had heard other people tell me their ghost stories, and I'd shared other people's ghost stories, but I hadn't really had anything happen to me. And I decided, you know what? I think I'm gonna go put myself in a place that if something was going to happen, that would be the time and the place that it would happen. And the old Charleston jail is the creepiest, most haunted place in Charleston. It's something we talk about extensively on the tour. It has a super dark history. Lots of people died there, so that is. And the most famous ghost to haunt there is a woman by the name of Lavinia Fisher, who you may remember. We talked about her quite a bit on the tour.
Yeah.
Who is suspected of being the first female serial killer in the United States, though it turns out there is a lot to that story, and it's a very different story once you get into it than what it appears to be on the surface. And that was something interesting that happened when I spent the night in the jail. It was sort of a turning point for me with regard to that story, because as a tour guide, I can get somewhat stubborn about changing stories once I get used to them. And that was an experience where I changed how I thought about Lavinia Fisher. I don't always have time to tell the whole story on the tour, but the podcast I'm able to go into it in depth. There's a 2-part episode called Condemned, which is all about me spending the night in the jail. And that is another example of something I mentioned earlier of a story of an injustice that sort of found its way into a ghost story, and there it safely resides until years later when it can be talked about. But I get into that in the podcast. It's a long, complicated story.
I mean, you're doing a tour in a little bit, and it must be your busiest time of the year. But when we did the tour, it was in August, so it seems like you do them year round, right? But yeah, just tell us more about your tour, so people who are in Charleston can sign up and have as much fun as we did.
Well, it's a 90-minute tour, and Charleston is. I'm very fortunate in giving ghost tours in Charleston, in that Charleston is a city that it's very easy to walk around. Things are really close together. So the tour, we are able to visit 7, 8, 9 locations depending on the group and how busy it is, and what time we get started. But they include a haunted restaurant and a haunted hotel and a haunted library. And we go by a couple of different graveyards and talk about the ghosts there. And we also are able to get in some interesting history, like a little-known witch trial that occurred here, and some other bits of dark and interesting history. And so I enjoy giving the tour and getting the opportunity to talk about all of those things. Charleston just has no shortage of stories. There's probably 3 times as many stories here as I could tell on any given tour.
Like I said before, you're really good at the tour. We had a lot of fun. We learned a lot. And it was kind of cool to like hear about a particular restaurant and then go eat there the next night and be a little creeped out when, what did I say? I said, we were done eating at Poogan's Porch, and I was like, I have to go to the bathroom.
Oh,
and
yeah.
We were sitting upstairs.
Yeah.
Well, a couple of other things happened, Shadi, but because it felt like somebody was just, like when it feels like somebody's behind you.
Yeah.
Just you can just feel somebody's presence. And so I thought it was the waiter, like maybe 2 or 3 times, but I turned around and he was not there. And I was like, okay. Like the first time you're like, that's weird. And then it happens 2 more times and you're like, all right.
What's going on?
Yeah. And then when we were done and we were about to leave, I was like, well, I have to go to the bathroom. And then as soon as I was like about to open the bathroom door, Chandi was like, wait, remember the story?
Don't go on the second floor. Go
like,
to the first one, right?
Gonna go to the bathroom downstairs.
Yeah, well, for anybody that that's wondering, the restaurant is called Pugin's Porch, and it's a restaurant that's in an old house. And people, especially, there's something about the bathroom upstairs. People will go in the bathroom, and they'll be washing their hands, and they'll look in the mirror, and there'll be a woman standing right behind them, and it's this older lady in a black dress, and you spin around, and there's no one there. And you think, oh, it was my imagination. And then you turn and you look back at the mirror and she's still standing behind you. And you take off out of the bathroom. And people have described that happening to them. Or being in the bathroom by themselves and having somebody just start knocking on the door of the bathroom. But the restaurant is thought to be haunted by a woman named Zoe Saint Amand, who lived in the house for decades. Before her sister passed away. She lived there with her sister. And then her sister passed away, and then Zoe got sick and passed away herself. But it is one of those places that you just really hear of a lot of things happening. There was an incident. I probably didn't mention it on the tour. I can share with you real quick. There was an incident because every year or two, Pugin's, in the wintertime when things get really slow here, like in January or so, they'll close down for a week and do like deep cleaning and some minor renovations and that kind of thing. And so a few years ago they did that. And the night they reopened, I was standing out in front of the restaurant with the tour group, and I was talking to the group, and there across the street, right in front of the restaurant, there was this guy who's just pacing back and forth right in front of the restaurant, smoking a cigarette. And he just keeps looking at us, and you could just feel the stress coming off of him in just waves. And he finally interrupted the tour, and he told us that he had been there at the restaurant at 3:00 in the morning that morning, power washing the building before they reopened. And he said he was standing on the front porch by the front door of the restaurant, and he was spraying the porch, and he just happened to turn and look through the window in the front door, and there was a woman in a black dress standing on the stairs watching him. And she just watched him for a moment, and then she turned around and walked upstairs. And he was so scared by that he wanted to leave. He just wanted to get his truck and get out of there. But he said he had to finish the job first. And so he said he stood on the sidewalk and he just sprayed it from the sidewalk, but he wouldn't go any closer than that.
I would have done.
And I guess he came back the next night to get paid, and just being there that close to the restaurant was freaking him out. And there is an element to this, I think, which doesn't necessarily always translate in this story. That you might say, well, okay, there's a woman inside the restaurant. You might startle you, but why is that such a big deal? But there is some other element to it that he was feeling that it goes beyond just what he saw. It's what he felt. And he wanted no part of it. He wanted to get as far away from that place as he could. In terms of a ghost tour, it's a very happy accident when you stumble across, somebody like that who's I hate to say it, who's sort of, I guess trauma dumps on us on the tour right there, but it's like perfect timing. But yeah, so that's a great restaurant. I'm glad you got to eat there.
The food is really good.
It's interesting that you
it was great.
Something too. Yeah.
Yeah. Chandi, of course, you had no experiences.
Oh yeah. Tonight, I'll tell you what. Tonight's a super busy night. I always tell people Halloween is really one of my least favorite nights actually to give ghost tours because it's so busy.
Yeah.
My favorite nights are kind of nights like when you guys did it and it's not so busy and, even maybe a little rainy and
yeah.
And it is, there's just more atmosphere to it.
Yeah. It was nice.
Change
It had like a
Halloween
vibe.
atmosphere, I think.
Yeah.
Or it just has a different atmosphere.
It was spooky.
Yeah, it had a vibe.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Which was kind of nice.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. And it was just us too, right? It was like
Yeah.
the tour was meant for us.
It was, I was thinking that night, interestingly enough, I was like, I think somehow because I think there was just somebody that just didn't show up.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, okay, I think this was just meant to be this way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was fun.
Yeah.
Chanda, you had your moment in front of that cemetery, but that
Yeah. I don't
it's fine.
remember, but
Because it was funny because, I mean, I know, Mike, I'm sure you have to go really soon, but
Oh, that's okay.
I think it was the door. That garden thing was a little interesting.
that was a
cemetery?
It was in
Okay.
so we
The
were
gate
across
to
the
the
street.
cemetery.
Yeah, we were across the street, and you had said people every now and then get kind of sick or kind of nauseous or
Yeah.
shaky or whatever in front.
Oh no, it was worse than that. It was worse than that.
Yeah, okay.
Between 2013 and 2021, 64 people on the ghost tour, my ghost tour, passed out in the exact same location.
Oh my gosh.
That location, it's this big iron gate that enters into a long dark alley that enters into a graveyard that looks like a graveyard out of a horror movie.
Yeah.
And it's called the Unitarian Church Graveyard. And I don't know why, but there was a period of years there where it would just happen consistently, and then it just stopped.
Wow.
And since then, I've had people have reacted to it, but it's not been that strong of a reaction.
Yeah. Because you said that, we crossed the street, you're telling us the stories, and then, Chandi, I don't know if you remember, you were just like,
Yeah.
you like stepped back, and you were just,
I was
you were like-
woozy. I didn't pass out, but it was just like, feels
Yeah.
weird,
Yeah.
lightheaded. And I was like,
I
what
felt fine.
happened? Why me?
Because you're a non-believer.
I would say I'm less of a believer than you, Zoe, but yeah, I've had some weird instances, but
Yeah, you hang around me, you'll have more. So
yeah. But
yeah,
no, Mike, I mean, I hope you get to rest and hopefully nothing crazy happens tonight.
Well, I always, whenever I'm going down for a tour, I always just hope that I have a fun group of people to talk to. The worst is just if people seem bored, and hopefully they won't be bored.
Yeah.
Oh no, I doubt it.
I'll try not to try to keep them from getting bored.
How many people?
But,
how many people in this tour signed up?
well, our biggest, a full tour is 20 people, and
Wow.
so we have 2 full tours tonight, which is to be expected on Halloween.
Oh my
Halloween
gosh.
is sort of like Halloween is the Black Friday for ghost tours. So,
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
It's-
basically
it's-
40 people?
yeah.
Is-
Mhm.
Okay.
nice.
Yeah. We're glad we
Yeah,
did
20
win it
people.
when
20
we did it.
people is a lot.
Yeah,
20 people is a big group.
yeah.
So it's the tours that I will remember and sort of cherish and remembering are more often the tours like the one I did with you guys, where it's a more personal and atmospheric experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Mike, thank you so much for joining us. It was a pleasure.
No, thank you.
Hopefully we get to bother you again.
Yeah.
Oh, I hope you do.
I mean, you have lots of stories and yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, stories are one thing I won't run out of too quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, thank you, Mike, so much, and happy Halloween.
Thank you, and same to you.
Thanks. Talk to you later.
Have a good night.
Good night. Bye.
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 We'd like to thank Mike for joining us on his busiest night of the year. Mike is the host of the podcast, Pleasing Terrors. You can listen to Pleasing Terrors wherever you get your podcasts.
He's also the owner, operator, and tour guide for the Pleasing Terrors Ghost Tour. So if you're ever in Charleston, make sure you book a tour with Mike. Trust me, you won't be disappointed.
We'll have a link to his podcast and to our website in the episode's show notes.
Well, that's going to do it for this episode of Bound by the Cloak. As always, you can find us on social media. We're on X, we're on Threads, we're on Instagram. You can find us and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We'll be back again in 2 weeks with a brand new episode. Thanks for listening.